Is Mattia Binotto's future as Ferrari team boss in the spotlight under pressure? And should it be after a 2022 season that started so well and then seemed to peter out? We're going to look into that in great depth now with Scott Mitchell-Malm and Ben Anderson joining me, Glenn Freeman. And Scott, let's get straight into this and try to explain why we're talking about this subject. What's been going on behind the scenes or in the rumour mill in F1? Is this a case of no smoke without fire when it comes to Binotto's future?
Basically, what has happened is that there has been an initial bit of briefing, but nobody, even I think at the sort of upper levels of Ferrari, including Binotto, know exactly from whom. Whereby the suggestion is that Mattia Binotto's time as Ferrari team principal is coming to an end, and that there's a bit of movement within the bigger Ferrari organisation, and to try and replace him with Fred Vasseur, who's currently in charge of Sauber and team principal of the team that runs as Alfa Romeo in Formula One. The suggestion is that ultimately there are too many failings on Ferrari's side. Binotto is responsible for that, and that he's not the man to lead them into the future. We've heard all sorts related to this. Binotto, I've heard, has looked into it himself because he's very worried and unsure about where it's come from. He's sought assurances from Ferrari's top dog, John Elkann, and said, well, if this isn't true, I want the team to put out a statement saying it's not true. That's why we saw the statement that we saw from Ferrari last week. But we've also heard that Fred Vasseur was lining up a trip to Maranello in between the Brazilian and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix weekends. And I can't imagine if that was the case, that he was going there just to discuss a renewal of Ferrari's engine customer deal for the Sauber Alfa Romeo team. So yeah, there is a lot going on. As I say, top people in Ferrari not 100% sure where it's come from, to the point where in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix paddock at the weekend, there was even some low-level interference with the way that media operations were running over the weekend, which the people inside the team didn't really know what that was sort of caused by, beyond the fact that there's a lot going on upstairs, was the way that it was described. So I think that this, no smoke without fire, I think is a very good way of putting it. But exactly where that leaves Binotto's future, who knows? I don't even think he does.
It sounds like they're not exactly sure where the fire's coming from either there. And that statement you mentioned there, where they completely dismissed and bit back against the rumours, that was interesting as well. It's been pointed out that none of the other Ferrari team bosses who have lost their job in recent years ever received such a vote of confidence. But Ben, looking at Binotto's situation, how would you assess the job he's done? Is he a man who should be under pressure?
Well, he sounded like a man who's under pressure when he was defending his record in the team principal's press conference in Abu Dhabi, pointing out that Ferrari's achieved its targets for 2022 under his leadership, returned to winning ways, returned to competitiveness again. But we all know that's not really enough for Ferrari. Ferrari expect to be winning championships, competing all the way to the end. And they haven't done that this season. They've tailed off. And Ferrari has a history of doing this recently with Binotto at the helm. 2017, he was technical director. They started strongly, couldn't sustain the championship challenge against Mercedes. It was the same in 2018. 2019 was a kind of weird year where the car was really competitive at certain tracks and then not at others. And obviously there was the question marks over the engine legality. And we saw what happened in 2020 and 2021, which were written off so that this season could be super competitive for Ferrari. Binotto undertook 2 restructurings of the team in that time, getting everything ready. And ultimately, it's been a disappointment. And if you're Ferrari top brass, regardless of the successes that Binotto's had, the stability he's brought, the success he's had in turning the engine around earlier in the hybrid era and then taking over from James Allison when he left the team unexpectedly, there are still weaknesses in pretty much every area of the team, from track operations to chassis concept to development to engine reliability. And you could say, well, the buck stops with him. He's been in charge of this team for a long time, and yet it's still not performing to the level it needs to fight for the championship.
Now, Scott, I thought it was interesting that Carlos Sainz was asked about this, and he went for the familiar trope that will possibly resonate at Ferrari when he said Rome wasn't built in a day. That felt to me like a suggestion that what Ferrari needs right now is not sackings, it's consistency and and stick to the path that they're already on, presumably with Binotto at the helm. Do you think it would be too soon, given the journey Ferrari's been on from where it was a couple of years ago? Would it be too soon to make a change for 2023?
I think it probably would, just on the basis of giving him another season has a relatively low downside and potentially quite a high upside, on in the sense that when you're rebuilding an F1 team and trying to, become a championship challenger again, that journey is rarely, perfectly linear. I think you're going to have, as long as the trend's in the right direction, you can have some ups and downs in between. And I certainly wouldn't defend Ferrari's season as a whole. I never bought into the stuff that they were saying earlier in the year, where they just kept reiterating, no, we're not meant to be fighting for the title this year. That's not what's meant to happen. You started the season with a car that was capable of fighting for the championship. Your goals change based on the reality of the situation in front of you. So yeah, pre-season, Ferrari probably would have taken second in both championships and a few wins, but not after the first few rounds of the season. So they've failed in that regard, but they have made quite a big step. One argument that I do hear from time to time, which I think is fair, is that they've done the hard part in that they've fixed, a lot of the car and engine weaknesses from before that, and yeah, they need to improve on development and all the things that Ben pointed out. That's absolutely valid, but they are chipping away in the right areas, making progress. If you just go one more year to see if Binotto can actually fix those remaining weaknesses, like I say, the upside is massive. And the downside to letting him do that is Ferrari has another year in which they win a load of races and probably finish in the top 2 or 3 of the championship, which, it isn't a bad trade-off. So I think one more year is fine, but absolutely judge him on 2023. He has nowhere to hide in 2023.
Yeah, and there's going to be even fiercer opposition with surely Mercedes getting its act together as well. Now, Ben, you did quite a good, I would say, dismantling there of the defence for Binotto. So have you got anyone in mind that Ferrari should be looking at? We obviously heard Fred Vasseur's name being linked. Would he be at the top of your list, or is there someone else they should be going for?
Yeah, I'm not sure about Fred. I think he's done a good job at Sauber, Alfa Romeo, but it's a big step up to the white hot fires of Ferrari. I think the Charles Leclerc camp would enjoy him being there, because obviously they work well together when Charles was a rookie. Why not go for a bit of a retro reunion? Ross Brawn's back on the market. He's shortly to leave his job at Formula One, and Jean Todt is not long out of his job as president at the FIA. So you could get the band back together. Rory Byrne's still there, basically lurking around in the corridors. So why not get the late 90s, early 2000s dream team back together and restore Ferrari to its former glory?
Yeah, what's Luca Di Montezemolo up to as well? Why not get him back as well while we're at it? Rubens Barrichello, he's still driving out in Brazil. Get him back in, put him in one of the cars. Why not? It's just one of those things with Ferrari where they can't. This might be where there's 1% of merit in what Ben's suggesting. It's that they can't help themselves but go back to the past a few times. But I think they need to look forward. Binotto was meant to be this, new era, new culture. Let's stop falling for that same trick of firing people the second things don't go our way. If you don't stick with Binotto, you need to go for someone who's going to embody those cultures, okay? That culture, that ethos, that way of working. So Fred might do that. Vasseur has strengths. The question I have against him is that the biggest weakness for Ferrari under Binotto's leadership is the competency of the race team and some of the strategic calls, which is also the biggest weakness at Sauber, or one of the biggest weaknesses at Sauber still. So I'm not 100% sure on that. It is a bit apples and oranges given the size and qualities of the organisation. So wouldn't judge Vasseur entirely on that. But I think it would, someone like an Andreas Seidel type, I think would be better. Someone who is working in, frankly, a slightly bigger and more successful organisation than a Sauber, but also is, zero politics. He's absolutely no nonsense, doesn't entertain any of that, fiercely protective of his workforce. All these kind of values that you kind of think, Ferrari could do with some of this. So that's why I think Ferrari needs to be a modern F1 team, not one of that slightly chaotic, shambolic Italian team of the past. So Binotto has tried to take the team towards that. Okay, maybe it's not quite worked. Maybe it will if he's given time. If it's not Binotto, it has to be someone that adheres to those new values.